Welcome back to the channel where we continue on with our Power BI series. We've been showing you how to learn DAX and the basics of DAX fundamentals. We've started off our data model by including a sum and average DAX expression. Then we went to a minimum and maximum, and today we're going to talk about one of the more important ones called count rows. You'll use this important function when you want to count the number of rows in a table. Now, in your tables, you have rows and you have columns, and we're going to show you how to count rows on today's show. Let's go to Power BI. Back in Power BI, where today we're going to take a look at how to use the count rows DAX measure to count the number of rows in a table. Now, so far, we have looked at the following measures in our series on DAX. We have calculated a total revenue and a total views. And remember, this data table is called YouTube, and the data inside the YouTube download from YouTube channel is views, watch hours, minutes, and revenue. And remember, when you're using DAX, what you're trying to do is ask business questions and then find the answers using DAX. So we wanted to know the total revenue, so we added up the sum of revenue and got total revenue. For total views, we added up the sum of views and got total views. The maximum revenue was using the function max, and we got the maximum revenue in this data set, $148 this channel made one day. And the minimum number of views in this data set is 114. So on one day, they only had 114 views, but on another day, they had 33,000 views. So this channel definitely has some seasonality. And now what we're going to try to do, one of the things you're going to want to look at your data table, and in this case, it's the YouTube. When you go to your model view, we have our calendar view and we have our YouTube view. And every date in this table has a line item that has views, watch hours, minutes, and revenue. So we want to know the total number of days, which is January 1, 2022 through May 31st of 2023. And how you do that is by counting rows. Now, the syntax for count rows is create a new measure. And the first thing you always want to do when you create a new measure is name that measure. Now, for the demo here, we're going to name it number of rows so that it's easy identifiable. But when you create your models, you'll want to name that data so that when people are using the data, you've got your data analysts, the people and data developers that are building the models, and then you've got your data users, the people using those models. So number of rows is equal to, and then your syntax is Shift-Enter to get a new line. And the answer that you're trying to get here is how many rows are in that YouTube. And the function for that is count rows. So once you use your IntelliSense, count rows. And what I'm going to do this time is actually use the help expression, which returns a table, counts the number of rows in a table. And that is what we're going to do for this measure, which is number of rows. So we're going to hit left parenthesis. That opens up the expression. Shift-Enter brings a new line. And now what we want to do is search for the table. Now, in this example, we have one table as our fact table, which is YouTube. So it only comes up with one option once you type in U. So we're going to use YouTube as the table. And then we want to close out that expression by hitting Shift-Enter, backspace, and then that'll close it out. Now we have created the measure number of rows, which is count rows, which is the syntax, and that is the function name. And we are counting the number of rows in YouTube. So once you have the measure, you can then see the measure by bringing in a card. And now we will be able to see the number of rows in that table by just bringing the number of rows into our data. And so from January 1 of 2022 through May 31st of 2023, there was 516 rows. And what this allows you to do when you have a measure implicitly, and now this data is static data. When we do a future video, we're going to have data that changes so that every day that you refresh it, you'd add more rows. But in this example, if we wanted to see how much revenue per day that this channel made, we would take our total revenue and divide it by the number of rows. So what we would do is nest those measures in there, which we'll talk about it, but we'll actually create a measure called revenue per day. Shift enter to get a new line, and we're going to divide total revenue, and that's the numerator, and the denominator is the number of rows, which is the second measure. So we're going to type in NUM and number of rows will come up. And then we want to close that out with the right parentheses. Now to format in DAX, you want to get used to formatting, Shift Enter, and now we will have the right parenthesis to close that out at the bottom. So now we can figure out the revenue per day. And if we want to see the revenue per day, we'd bring in a new card. And we are now going to bring over our revenue per day, and it's $16.67. So that's the revenue per day because we were able to have that count rows measure. Now, if the number of rows changes and the total revenue changes, then this measure would change. And we don't have to update that. We just need to refresh the data either manually with a refresh, or if you're connected to a Power BI refreshing service, which is part of the Power BI service, maybe it refreshes every morning and then you would get that new number, which would be your total revenue per day. So in this video, we created a measure called count rows using the count rows function. Then we did a revenue per day by taking the count rows new measure, number of rows, as the numerator and dividing it by the total revenue. Now we're going to continue on in our DAX series learning more about some time intelligence functions, but count rows is definitely one of the more important functions that you will be using when you're writing DAX, whether you're writing it in Excel or whether you're writing it in Power BI, using and learning count rows as we continue along in our Learning DAX Power BI series.